On March 2, 2012, an EF4 tornado ripped through Henryville, Indiana, with winds exceeding 170 miles per hour. 11 people were killed in 20 minutes of apocalyptic destruction, but 5 people, an entire family, simply disappeared without a trace. No bodies, no evidence, nothing. For 12 years, everyone believed the tornado had carried them away, scattering their remains across miles of farmland. But on March 1, 2024, construction workers broke ground on a property next to where that family once lived. What they discovered 4 feet underground would reveal a truth far more terrifying than any natural disaster. This is the story of the Hartley family and the monster who hid his crime inside a tragedy for over a decade. Sarah Mitchell stands in an empty lot on a cold March morning in 2024, holding a faded photograph. She's 28 years old now, but in the picture she's 14. Arms wrapped around her best friend Emma Hartley, both of them laughing at something long forgotten. This lot, overgrown with weeds and marked by a small memorial stone, is all that remains of 247 Maple Ridge Drive, where Emma's family once lived. Sarah comes here every year on March 2nd. She's been doing it for 12 years, ever since the day Emma disappeared. She places flowers. She reads Emma's last text message aloud, the message that's haunted her for over a decade. In shelter, safe. Talk after storm. Emma sent that text at 2:47 p.m. on March 2nd, 2012, just minutes before the tornado struck. After that, silence. Emma Hartley, 16 years old, vanished. So did her father Robert, 43, her mother Diana, 41, her brothers Kyle, 12, and Mason, 8. An entire family, gone in an instant, or so everyone thought. The official explanation was tragic but logical. Their bodies had been carried away by the tornado's incredible force, scattered and buried across the Indiana countryside where they might never be found. After months of searching that turned up nothing, the case was closed. The Hartley family was presumed dead, victims of one of the most powerful tornadoes in Indiana history. But Sarah never believed it. Something about the official story never sat right with her. Emma had texted, "safe." She was in their tornado shelter, a reinforced concrete room specifically designed to survive direct hits. How could all 5 of them just vanish? For 12 years, Sarah refused to let it go. She organized volunteer searches. She created Facebook pages. She studied criminal justice in college, driven by a need to understand what had happened. Everyone told her to move on, to accept the unacceptable. The town rebuilt. Life continued. But Sarah kept searching. And yesterday, one day before the 12th anniversary, her persistence was finally vindicated, because what happened to the Hartley family had nothing to do with the tornado at all. Let me take you back to the beginning, to Henryville, Indiana, in early 2012, and show you exactly what happened, and why it took 12 years to uncover the horrifying truth. Henryville, Indiana, population 1,905, sits in Clark County along the southern edge of what locals call Tornado Alley. It's the kind of small Midwestern town where everyone knows everyone, where families have lived for generations, where people still wave to neighbors from their front porches. The town splits into 3 main areas: downtown Henryville along Highway 31, newer subdivisions built in the 1990s on the eastern edge, and older residential streets on the west side where families have deep roots. The Hartley family lived at 247 Maple Ridge Drive, on that west side, in a modest 2-story home built in 1978. Robert Hartley worked as a foreman at a manufacturing plant in Louisville, Kentucky, a 30-minute commute he'd made for 18 years. His wife Diana taught 3rd grade at Henryville Elementary School. They were the kind of family that formed the backbone of small-town America. Robert was the guy who coached Little League Baseball, who helped neighbors jump-start their cars on cold mornings, who could fix just about anything mechanical. Diana organized school bake sales, volunteered at the church, and had a reputation for bringing casseroles to anyone going through hard times. Their house always smelled like something baking: cookies, brownies, Diana's famous banana bread. Emma, their oldest, was a junior at Henryville High School, honor roll every semester. Varsity volleyball, outside hitter, known for her powerful serve. She wanted to study veterinary medicine at Purdue University. She loved animals so much that she'd convinced her parents to adopt 3 stray cats over the years, each one found wandering the neighborhood. Kyle, their middle child, was in 7th grade. Baseball was his life. He collected baseball cards obsessively, keeping them in protective sleeves in carefully organized binders. His room was covered in posters of Derek Jeter and Albert Pujols. His dream was to play for the St. Louis Cardinals someday. Mason, the baby of the family at 8 years old, was the kind of kid who could make anyone laugh. His teachers adored him. He built elaborate blanket forts in the living room that stayed up for weeks because his parents didn't have the heart to take them down. He was convinced he could talk to their 3 cats telepathically. He carried a stuffed elephant named Peanut everywhere, even to school tucked in his backpack. They were an ordinary family living an ordinary life in an ordinary town, the kind of family you'd never imagine becoming the center of a mystery that would haunt an entire community for 12 years. Next door at 251 Maple Ridge Drive lived Dennis Brennan. He was 58 years old in 2012, a retired electrician who'd moved to Henryville in 1989 with his wife Linda. After Linda died of ovarian cancer in 2009, Dennis became increasingly isolated. He was still friendly when you'd see him. He'd wave, help shovel snow from elderly neighbors' driveways, fix electrical problems for people when asked. But he kept to himself mostly, spending hours in his basement workshop where he did woodworking projects. The Hartley family had moved in next door in 2007. Over the years, they'd developed the kind of neighborly relationship common in small towns. Robert helped Dennis with yard work after Linda's death. Diana brought him casseroles and cookies. The kids would sometimes grab his mail when he traveled to visit his daughter in Florida. Dennis seemed like a nice man. Quiet. Sad after his wife's death, understandably. A little lonely, maybe, but harmless. That assessment would prove to be catastrophically wrong. In 2009, after Linda Brennan died, Dennis applied for a building permit with Clark County. He told the permitting office he wanted to build a wine cellar and expand his workshop in the basement. The permit was approved for basic renovations, some concrete work, reinforced walls, nothing unusual. What Dennis actually built was something else entirely. Between June and August of 2009, Dennis Brennan constructed a hidden underground chamber beneath his property. It measured 10 feet by 12 feet, with 6-foot ceilings. The walls were poured concrete, 3 inches thick, reinforced with rebar. There was no ventilation system, no windows, no light, except what you brought with you. The only access was through a concealed hatch in his basement workshop, hidden beneath a heavy workbench. He lined the walls with foam insulation, not for temperature control, but for sound dampening. He installed industrial bolts on the exterior of the hatch, the kind that could only be operated from outside. He told neighbors who asked about the construction noise that he was building a wine cellar and a safe room. Nobody questioned it. Why would they? Dennis was a licensed electrician with 40 years of experience. Building a wine cellar was a normal retirement project. The construction was legal, permitted, unremarkable. But Dennis Brennan wasn't building a wine cellar. He was building a prison, and he was doing it because of the teenage girl next door. Dennis Brennan's obsession with Emma Hartley began sometime in 2010, when she was 14 years old. He watched her through his windows as she practiced volleyball in her driveway. He made excuses to be outside when she left for school. He memorized her schedule, when she came home from practice, when she walked the family dogs, when she sat on the porch doing homework. Years later, when investigators searched a storage unit Brennan had rented in Louisville, they found journals, handwritten entries, meticulous and disturbing, documenting his fixation. He wrote about her smile, her laugh, how she looked in her volleyball uniform. He wrote about wanting to protect her, about how he could give her everything she needed, about how someday she'll understand. The journals revealed a man descending into delusional obsession. After his wife died, Dennis had nothing to anchor him to reality. His daughter lived in Florida and rarely visited. He had no close friends. He spent his days alone in his house, watching Emma through the windows, building fantasies in his head. But Dennis was patient. He knew he couldn't just abduct a teenage girl in a small town. The moment she disappeared, every police department in 3 states would be searching. Amber alerts, media coverage, investigation. He'd be the obvious suspect. The neighbor, the older man with no alibi, living alone. He needed the perfect circumstances. Chaos, confusion. A moment when the impossible might seem possible, when a disappearance could be explained by something other than abduction. He needed a disaster. And on March 2, 2012, nature provided exactly that. Before I tell you what happened that day, Before I reveal the horrifying truth that nobody suspected for 12 years, let me ask you something. Where are you watching this from? What's your hometown like? Have you ever lived through a tornado warning, heard those sirens wailing, felt that electric tension in the air when the sky turns green and everyone rushes to take cover? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're finding this story as compelling as I hope you are, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. This is the kind of deep dive investigation I do on this channel, and there's so much more coming. Click that like button too. It really helps get these stories out to more people who need to hear them. Now, let's go back to March 1st, 2012, 24 hours before everything changed. Robert Hartley woke up at 5:30 a.m. on Thursday morning, March 1st, same as every weekday for the past 18 years. He made coffee in the kitchen while the house was still quiet. Diana came downstairs in her bathrobe at 6 a.m., and they shared 20 minutes of peaceful conversation before the chaos of getting 3 kids ready for school began. It was an unremarkable morning. Kyle complained about having too much math homework. Emma was running late and grabbed a granola bar instead of eating breakfast. Mason couldn't find one of his sneakers, and they eventually discovered it in the blanket fort in the living room. Robert drove to Louisville, arriving at the manufacturing plant by 6:45 a.m. He spent the day overseeing production lines, solving problems, doing the job he'd done for nearly 2 decades. Nothing unusual, nothing remarkable. Diana dropped the boys at school and drove to Henryville Elementary, where she taught her 3rd graders about fractions. During lunch, she texted Robert about weekend plans, maybe driving to Cincinnati to visit her sister, maybe taking the kids to a movie. Simple domestic decisions, the kind of mundane planning that fills normal lives. Emma had volleyball practice after school. She was working on improving her serve, frustrated because she kept hitting the net. Her coach told her she was overthinking it. After practice, she came home tired, ate leftover spaghetti while doing chemistry homework. She texted Sarah Mitchell, her best friend since elementary school, complaining about their upcoming test. Kyle had baseball practice that evening. Robert picked him up at 7 p.m., and they stopped at Dairy Queen on the way home. Kyle got a chocolate-dipped cone, same as always. They talked about the upcoming season, about Kyle's improved pitching, about whether he'd make the traveling team. Normal father-son conversation in the warm glow of the Dairy Queen parking lot. Mason spent the evening building an elaborate blanket fort castle in the living room. Diana took photos on her camera, photos that would later be recovered from storage and shown in court as evidence of the family's last normal day. In those photos, Mason is smiling, gap-toothed, holding his stuffed elephant Peanut, explaining the complex architecture of his blanket kingdom. By 10 p.m. everyone was in bed. The house was quiet, peaceful, safe. Outside, stars were visible through scattered clouds. The temperature had dropped to a comfortable 54 degrees. None of them knew they had less than 20 hours left together as a family. None of them knew that by this time tomorrow, 4 of them would be trapped underground in a concrete tomb, slowly dying, their screams for help muffled by foam insulation and buried beneath 4 feet of earth. And none of them knew that the man next door, quiet Dennis Brennan, who'd accepted their casseroles and their kindness, was about to use a tornado as cover for one of the most depraved murders in Indiana history. Friday, March 2nd, 2012 started ordinary. At 6 a.m., the National Weather Service issued a severe weather outlook for southern Indiana. A powerful cold front was moving east from Oklahoma, colliding with unseasonably warm, moist air that had pushed up from the Gulf of Mexico. The conditions were textbook for supercell thunderstorm development, and supercells spawn tornadoes. But early March tornado outbreaks, while not unheard of, aren't common. Most people in Henryville glanced at the forecast, noted the possibility of storms, and went about their day. They'd lived through dozens of tornado watches that amounted to nothing but heavy rain. Robert checked the forecast during his morning break at the Louisville plant. By 10 a.m., the prediction had shifted. The Storm Prediction Center had upgraded the risk to moderate, meaning strong tornadoes were likely, not just possible. Robert texted Diana, "Watch out for weather this afternoon. Might come home early." Diana replied, "Will do, love you." By noon, the sky over southern Indiana had taken on an ominous character. The temperature had climbed to 72 degrees, abnormally warm for early March. The air felt thick, heavy, charged with potential energy. Dark clouds were building to the southwest, towering anvil-shaped formations that any Midwesterner recognizes as dangerous. At 12:15 p.m., the tornado watch went into effect for Clark County and surrounding areas. Henryville Elementary School announced early dismissal at 1 p.m. Parents flooded the parking lot, picking up children under increasingly threatening skies. Teachers hugged their students, telling them to stay safe, to listen to their parents, to get home quickly. Diana gathered Mason from his third-grade classroom and picked up Kyle from the middle school next door. By 1:30 p.m., all three Hartley children were home. Emma was annoyed about missing the second half of school. She'd wanted to talk to a boy in her English class. Kyle was excited. He loved storms, loved watching the weather radar, loved the drama of tornado warnings. Mason was already glued to the TV in the living room, watching meteorologists track the developing supercell. At 2 p.m., Robert left the manufacturing plant. The sky to the west had turned a sickly greenish gray, the color veteran storm chasers call tornado green. Other workers were leaving too, the parking lot emptying faster than he'd ever seen on a normal Friday afternoon. The plant manager didn't even try to keep people there. Everyone understood the danger. Robert got on Highway 31 heading south toward Henryville, watching the horizon, watching the sky, listening to weather radio. The storm system was intensifying rapidly. Radar showed a supercell with a hook echo, the telltale signature of rotation, of a tornado forming. At 2:35 p.m., the tornado warning was issued. A confirmed large tornado had touched down near Marysville, Indiana, 30 miles west of Henryville. It was moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. Based on its trajectory and speed, it would reach Henryville in approximately 15 minutes. The outdoor warning sirens began wailing at 2:38 p.m. That sound, if you've never heard tornado sirens, you can't truly understand the visceral dread they produce. It's a mechanical wail that rises and falls, loud enough to be heard for miles, designed to cut through walls and windows and reach into every corner of a community. It means, take cover now. It means, you have minutes, not hours. It means, this is real. Diana Hartley heard the sirens and immediately went into action. She'd rehearsed this scenario dozens of times. Robert had built their tornado shelter specifically for moments like this. Kids, basement now! Emma grabbed her cell phone from the kitchen counter. Kyle grabbed Buster, their golden retriever, who was already barking frantically at the sirens. Mason grabbed his stuffed elephant Peanut. They descended the basement stairs as the sky outside turned black as midnight in the middle of the afternoon. The Hartley basement had two sections, a utility room with the furnace and water heater, and the tornado shelter Robert had built in 2009. The shelter was a concrete-walled room, 8 feet by 10 feet, with steel reinforcing and a heavy door. Inside were supplies, bottled water, flashlights, a first aid kit, blankets. Robert had stocked it for exactly this scenario. Diana hustled the kids into the shelter. Buster, terrified by the sirens and the atmospheric pressure change that animals can sense, was whining and pulling at his collar. Emma was on her phone, checking social media, texting friends. Kyle was peering out the small basement window, watching the sky, fascinated and frightened in equal measure. "Mum, it's so dark," Mason whispered, clutching Peanut. "It's okay, baby. We're safe down here. That's why Daddy built this room." Diana closed the shelter door but didn't lock it from the inside. Not yet. She wanted Robert home. He was close, maybe 5 or 10 minutes away. She'd wait as long as possible before sealing them in completely. At 2:45 p.m., she called Robert. The call lasted 23 seconds, the last conversation they would ever have. "We're in the shelter," Diana said, her voice calm, but tight with tension. "Where are you?" "5 minutes away. Stay inside. I love you. I love you too. Be careful." She hung up. The roar was building outside, a sound unlike anything natural, like a freight train mixed with an explosion, a mechanical grinding that seemed to come from everywhere at once. At 2:47 p.m., Emma texted Sarah Mitchell. "In shelter. Safe. Talk after storm." Emma hit send, not knowing that would be the last message she'd ever send to anyone, not knowing that within minutes she'd be fighting for her life against an enemy that had nothing to do with the tornado. At 2:48 p.m., something happened that nobody in Henryville suspected at the time, something that would remain hidden for 12 years. Dennis Brennan, next door at 251 Maple Ridge Drive, exited his basement through an exterior bulkhead door, the kind common in Midwest homes with walkout basements. He stepped out into the apocalyptic afternoon, the sky black and green, debris already starting to fall from the sky, the tornado visible on the horizon as a massive dark wedge. He crossed the 30 feet of yard, separating his property from the Hartley property. He was carrying a pistol, and he was about to commit one of the most carefully planned murders in Indiana criminal history, using a natural disaster as the perfect cover. Let me pause here for a moment, because what I'm about to tell you is going to sound impossible. It's going to sound like something from a horror movie. But every detail has been confirmed by forensic evidence, by recovered journals, by digital forensics, and by Dennis Brennan's own partial confession during plea negotiations. The Hartley family was not killed by the tornado. They were murdered by their neighbor, and they didn't die quickly. At 2:48 p.m., Dennis Brennan entered the Hartley home through the basement exterior entrance. Most homes in this area have walkout basements with exterior doors. It's standard construction for properties built on the slight slopes common in southern Indiana. The door wasn't locked. Nobody locks their doors during a tornado warning. You might need to let neighbors in, might need to exit quickly, might need emergency responders to access your home. Brennan descended the basement stairs. He could hear voices coming from behind the tornado shelter door. Diana calling for Robert, Emma on her phone, Kyle trying to calm Buster, Mason asking if the tornado was going to hit their house. Brennan approached the shelter door. It was closed but not locked from the inside. Diana was waiting for Robert. Through the steel, Brennan spoke. "Diana, it's Dennis from next door. My shelter door is jammed shut. Can you let me in?" This was the critical manipulation. This was the moment when Dennis Brennan exploited the kindness and trust of a family that had shown him nothing but compassion for 5 years. Diana Hartley, without hesitation, opened the door. Dennis was pointing a pistol at her chest. "Everyone stay quiet," he said, his voice eerily calm over the building roar of the approaching tornado. "Diana, take everyone next door to my shelter. Now." Through the basement. Diana's mind must have been racing. A gun. Their neighbor. The tornado minutes away. Her children behind her. The roar building. Every second mattered. "Dennis, what are you... now? Or I shoot Emma first and you watch." Diana, making the impossible choice every parent prays they never face, complied. She turned to her children. "Kids, we're going to Mr. Brennan's shelter right now, quick." "But Mom," Emma started. "Now, Emma." Diana herded Emma, Kyle, and Mason out of their shelter, across the utility room, out the exterior basement door. Emma still had her phone clutched in her hand. Kyle had Buster on a leash. Mason was crying, clutching Peanut, not understanding why they were leaving their safe room to go outside when the sirens were still screaming. They crossed the yards between houses as the tornado roared closer. Debris was falling from the sky, small branches, shingles ripped from roofs miles away, paper swirling in the violent updrafts. The wind was screaming. The pressure was dropping so rapidly that their ears were popping. At 2:49 p.m., just 2 minutes before the tornado would strike their house, the Hartley family entered Dennis Brennan's basement. Brennan forced them through his workshop to a heavy workbench in the corner. He shoved the workbench aside, revealing a hatch in the floor, the entrance to the underground chamber he'd built 3 years earlier. "Get in," he ordered. "Everyone." Diana saw the opening, saw the darkness below, understood in that terrible moment what was happening. "Please," she begged. "Dennis, please, the tornado is here. Let us stay in your basement. We won't tell anyone about the gun. We'll say we came over on our own. Please. My children." "Get in!" Emma tried to run. She was 16, athletic, fast, but Brennan grabbed her arm and twisted it viciously. She screamed in pain. Kyle, 12 years old but brave beyond his years, lunged at Brennan with his fists. Brennan shoved Kyle hard. The boy stumbled backward into the hatch opening, falling into the chamber below. The tornado was here. The roar was deafening. The Hartley house, 30 feet away, was disintegrating. They could hear it even through the tornado's apocalyptic sound. Walls exploding. Roof tearing away. Glass shattering. The building was being erased. Mason was screaming. Diana was pleading. Emma was fighting. Kyle was shouting from inside the chamber, trying to climb out. At 2:51 p.m., as the EF4 tornado with 170-mile-per-hour winds struck Maple Ridge Drive directly, Dennis Brennan forced all 4 Hartley family members into the underground chamber: Diana, Emma, Kyle, Mason. Buster, the golden retriever, was too aggressive, barking and snapping at Brennan. He released the dog, letting it run back toward the Hartley house. Buster would be found dead the next day, crushed by debris when the house collapsed. Brennan stood at the opening of the hatch, shining a flashlight down into the chamber. 4 people looked up at him from the darkness: a mother, a teenage girl, 2 boys, terrified, confused. The tornado's roar was so loud he could barely hear Diana screaming. "I'm sorry," Dennis Brennan said, "but you would have told. You would have ruined everything." Then he closed the hatch, slid 6 industrial bolts into place, and moved his heavy workbench back over the door. The tornado passed directly overhead. Brennan's house shook violently. Windows shattered. Part of his roof was torn away. He crouched in his workshop, protected by the underground location, as the world above was destroyed. The workshop barely moved. The workbench over the hatch didn't even shift. Below, in the sealed concrete chamber, 4 people were trapped in total darkness, screaming for help that would never come. The tornado passed in 20 minutes. By 3:10 p.m., the worst was over. The funnel had lifted north of Henryville, continuing its path of destruction toward Scottsburg. Dennis Brennan emerged from his basement at approximately 3:20 p.m. to a scene of utter devastation. The world had been transformed. Trees were snapped like matchsticks. Cars were overturned. Power lines were down everywhere, sparking in puddles. The air smelled like ozone and natural gas and destruction. The Hartley house at 247 Maple Ridge Drive was completely gone. Only the foundation remained, a concrete rectangle that marked where a family's home had stood minutes earlier. Everything else, 2 stories, all their possessions, decades of memories, had been scattered across miles of Indiana farmland. Other houses on the street were destroyed or severely damaged. Brennan could see bodies in some of the rubble. He could hear screaming, people emerging from shelters looking for loved ones, calling names. Brennan immediately joined the chaos. He helped search through debris. He called out for the Hartleys, playing the role of concerned neighbor. When other survivors asked if he'd seen them, he said no. He'd been in his shelter, hadn't heard anything over the tornado's roar. Below his workshop, beneath 4 feet of earth and a concealed hatch sealed with industrial bolts, 4 people were still alive. Emma Hartley tried desperately to use her cell phone in those first minutes. Her last text, "In shelter, safe, talk after storm," had gone through before Brennan forced them out. But in the underground chamber there was no signal. The concrete walls blocked everything. And even if there had been signal, the tornado had destroyed every cell tower within 5 miles. She typed anyway, hands shaking. "Someone here help." The message never sent. Within 15 minutes her phone battery died. Emma pounded on the hatch door with her fists. She screamed until her voice gave out. Kyle joined her, both of them pushing against the hatch. But it didn't budge. The industrial bolts held firm. The workbench above added hundreds of pounds of resistance. Diana tried to stay calm for the children. She held Mason, who was sobbing uncontrollably. She told them it would be okay, that someone would find them, that Robert would come. "Dad's going to dig through our house," Kyle said. "He'll find us gone and he'll look everywhere." "That's right, baby," Diana said. "Daddy will find us." But as the hours passed, as the initial terror gave way to uncomfortable waiting, then to genuine fear, the reality of their situation became undeniable. They had no water, no food, no light except what filtered through tiny gaps in the hatch. The chamber was completely sealed. As they breathed, the oxygen was being depleted and replaced with carbon dioxide. They were buried alive, and nobody in the world knew where they were. Robert Hartley arrived at the police barricade on Maple Ridge Drive at 3:45 p.m. He'd been caught on Highway 31 when the tornado hit, forced to take shelter in a drainage ditch as the funnel passed just a mile to his north. He'd watched his truck, a Ford F-150 he'd driven for 8 years, roll over 3 times from the windshield before slamming into a tree. He'd run the last 2 miles to his street. When he reached the barricade and saw the empty foundation where his home had stood, he collapsed to his knees in the mud and debris, screaming his family's names over and over until his voice broke. Police officers physically restrained him from running into the debris field. They told him it wasn't safe, that there were gas leaks, that he could be hurt. They promised they'd search, that rescue teams were coming, that they'd find his family. Robert was taken to the emergency command center at Henryville High School. He was in shock, shaking, unable to form complete sentences. Paramedics checked him for injuries. He had cuts and bruises from the drainage ditch, nothing serious, and gave him water. By nightfall, as temperatures dropped and rain began falling on the devastated town, the official list was compiled. 11 confirmed dead, 38 injured, 5 missing, all from the same family. The Hartley family had vanished. Search and rescue teams worked through the night with portable lights, digging through debris using thermal cameras, hoping to find survivors. When they reached the Hartley property at first light on March 3rd, they found the tornado shelter location. Robert had provided the building plans that clearly marked it. What they found confused them. The concrete walls of the shelter were partially standing, damaged but not destroyed. The steel door was missing entirely, not bent, not twisted, but gone, presumably carried away by the tornado. The interior was filled with debris from the collapsed house above. They excavated carefully, expecting to find bodies. They found Buster, the golden retriever, dead. They found Emma's cell phone, battery dead, the last text still displayed on the cracked screen. They found no human remains. Cadaver dogs showed no indication of bodies. Thermal imaging showed nothing. Ground-penetrating radar showed no anomalies. The Hartley family simply wasn't there. For the next 12 years, investigators pursued every possible theory. Theory 1. The family had been carried away by the tornado's incredible force. Statistically possible, EF4 tornadoes with 170 km/h winds can carry human bodies considerable distances. Searches extended 5 miles along the damage path, then 10, then 20. Volunteers combed through fields and forests. Helicopters with thermal cameras flew grid patterns. Nothing. Theory 2. Bodies were buried under debris somewhere along the path. This seemed most likely. But as months turned to years, as development resumed and land was cleared, nothing was found. No clothing, no bones, no evidence of human remains. Theory 3. The family had already evacuated before the tornado, debunked by phone records, text messages, and witness testimony placing them definitively at home in their shelter, minutes before the tornado struck. Theory 4. Something criminal had occurred during the chaos. This was considered briefly. Had someone used the tornado as cover for abduction or murder? But it seemed logistically impossible. All roads were blocked. The tornado hit with only minutes of warning. How could someone abduct an entire family in that time frame? The investigation stalled. The FBI filed it as a cold case. Local police kept it technically open, but had no active leads. Robert Hartley died in 2018, 6 years after the tornado, at age 49. The official cause was cardiac arrest, but everyone understood. He died of grief. He never recovered from losing his family. He'd spent 6 years visiting their empty graves, talking to them, apologizing for not being there when they needed him. Sarah Mitchell never stopped searching. She organized volunteer searches every March. She maintained the Facebook page. She refused to accept that her best friend had simply vanished into the wind. And 70 feet from where she placed flowers every year, sealed beneath 4 feet of earth in a neighbor's backyard, the answer waited to be discovered. On March 1, 2024, Marcus Chen, a developer from Indianapolis, broke ground on the old Brennan property at 251 Maple Ridge Drive. He'd bought the abandoned house 6 months earlier, planning to demolish it and build a new home. The Henryville real estate market was finally recovering 12 years after the tornado. His excavation crew arrived at 10 a.m. with a small excavator to assess the foundation. The foreman, Miguel Rodriguez, operated the machine in the backyard, digging to determine what needed to be removed. At 10:30 a.m., at a depth of approximately 4 feet, the excavator bucket struck something solid. Miguel stopped the machine and climbed down to investigate, expecting to find an old septic tank or utility line. What he saw instead made him scramble backward out of the pit, shouting for his crew. It was concrete, poured concrete forming what appeared to be a wall. But through a gap where the excavator had broken through, Miguel could see something that made his blood run cold. Fabric. Deteriorated, filthy, but unmistakably clothing, and beneath the clothing, visible in the dirt and shadows, was the curve of a human skull. Miguel called 911 at 10:37 a.m. Within hours, Indiana State Police, FBI agents, and forensic teams descended on 251 Maple Ridge Drive. What they uncovered over 8 hours of meticulous excavation would finally answer 12 years of questions and reveal a truth more horrifying than anyone had imagined. A concrete chamber, 10 feet by 12 feet, buried 4 feet underground. A crude, hidden structure that had never appeared on any property survey or building record. Inside, 5 sets of human remains, 2 adults, 1 teenage female, 2 juvenile males. The forensic team worked with reverent precision, documenting every detail, photographing every angle. When they carefully lifted the remains for transport, personal effects were still present. A corroded watch with an engraving. To Robert, Love Always Diana, 1995. A cell phone in a plastic case, later confirmed through IMEI number as Emma Hartley's iPhone, a child's sneaker size 6. Nike brand, matching the description of shoes Mason had been wearing. A tarnished wedding ring engraved R+D Forever, 1991. A stuffed elephant, severely deteriorated but identifiable. Mason's beloved Peanut. At 6:47 p.m. on March 1, 2024, 12 years and 4 hours after Emma Hartley sent her final text, Detective James Morrison held a press conference. This afternoon, construction workers discovered human remains at 251 Maple Ridge Drive in Henryville, he announced, his voice tight with controlled emotion. Based on preliminary examination, location, and physical evidence, we have reason to believe these remains are those of the Hartley family. He paused, his jaw clenched. This is now being investigated as a homicide. We do not believe the Hartley family died as a result of the tornado. We believe they were murdered. The news exploded across every media platform within minutes. National coverage returned to Henryville for the first time in a decade. The cold case that had haunted a community for 12 years had been cracked wide open. But the truth was only beginning to emerge. Now, before I tell you exactly what happened in that underground chamber, before I reveal how 4 people died over the course of 4 days while the world searched in all the wrong places, I want to ask you something. Have you been following along? Are you as horrified as I am by this story? Because we're about to get into the forensic details, the timeline of death, and the monster who caused it all. If you're still watching, leave a comment letting me know. Tell me what you're thinking right now. Tell me if you remember hearing about the Hartley family disappearance back in 2012. And please, hit that like button if this investigation is as compelling to you as it is to me. It helps more people find these stories. Now let's talk about what the forensic evidence revealed. And I warn you, this is going to be difficult to hear. Dr. Lisa Chen, the forensic anthropologist brought in to analyze the remains, worked with a team of specialists to reconstruct the final hours of the Hartley family. What they discovered, through skeletal analysis, decomposition patterns, and physical evidence, painted an unbearably tragic picture. The 4 Hartley family members, Diana, Emma, Kyle, and Mason, were alive when Dennis Brennan sealed them in the underground chamber at approximately 2:51 p.m. on March 2, 2012. The chamber was 10 feet by 12 feet, with 6-foot ceilings, concrete walls 3 inches thick, no ventilation, no light, no water, no food. The only air was what existed in the chamber when the hatch was sealed. For 4 people, including 2 children, that air would last approximately 48 to 72 hours before oxygen levels dropped to dangerous levels. But dehydration would be the more immediate threat. The human body can survive roughly 3 days without water, less under stress conditions. Being trapped in complete darkness in a confined space, in a state of terror, these are extreme stress conditions. Based on the positioning of the remains and the physical evidence, forensic experts reconstructed the timeline. First 24 hours, March 2 to 3, 2012. All 4 family members alive, aware, alert. Emma's phone found near her remains showed she'd attempted to send one more message after the initial text to Sarah, "Someone here help," but it never sent. The phone died within minutes of being sealed in the chamber. They shouted for help. They pounded on the hatch. They screamed until their voices gave out. Above them, 4 feet of earth and a heavy workbench muffled every sound. Dennis Brennan was in his house 30 feet away, living his normal life. Search and rescue teams were swarming the area. Hundreds of people were combing through debris, looking for the Hartley family, never suspecting they were buried alive within shouting distance of where everyone was searching. Hours 24 to 48, March 3 to 4. Dehydration set in. With no water, the body begins shutting down. Thirst becomes agony. The mouth dries out completely. Thinking becomes cloudy. The body starts cannibalizing itself for moisture. Mason, age 8, was the smallest. His body had the least reserves. Forensic evidence suggests he died sometime during this period, roughly 36 to 48 hours after being sealed in the chamber, likely March 4th, approximately 48 hours after the tornado. His remains were found positioned against Diana's, her arms wrapped around him. Her final act as a mother was holding her youngest child as he died. Hours 48:72, March 4 to 5. Kyle, age 12, died next. Stronger than his little brother, he'd lasted longer. His remains were found in the southwest corner of the chamber. Based on physical evidence, he'd spent his final hours trying to comfort his brother and mother, telling stories, promising rescue was coming. Emma, age 16, was found near the hatch door. Her fingernails had been torn and bleeding. She'd scratched at the hatch until her fingers bled, leaving DNA evidence on the wood that would later prove crucial to the investigation. The concrete walls showed scratch marks where she'd clawed desperately, trying to find any weakness, any way out. She died approximately 60 to 72 hours after being sealed in, likely March 5th, 3 days after texting Sarah, "Safe." Hours 72:96, March 5 to 6. Diana was the last to die. Found positioned over Mason's body, her maternal instinct to protect her child persisted even in death. She'd scratched messages into the concrete walls with her fingernails, messages that were barely legible but heartbreaking. "Robert, we love you. God forgive." She died approximately 72 to 96 hours after being sealed in, likely on March 5th or early March 6th. She died alone, in complete darkness, having watched or heard all 3 of her children die before her. 4 people. A mother, a teenage girl, 2 boys, sealed underground while the world above searched for them in all the wrong places, dying slowly over 4 days from dehydration, oxygen deprivation, and despair. And Dennis Brennan, living 30 feet away, knew exactly where they were the entire time. One detail needs correction here, and it's important. Only 4 members of the Hartley family died in the chamber: Diana, Emma, Kyle, and Mason. Robert Hartley never made it home. His body was found on May 8, 2012, in a ravine off Highway 31. His truck had been blown off the road by the tornado's winds while he was racing home to his family. He'd died on impact, approximately 2:55 p.m. on March 2nd, just 4 minutes after the tornado struck, while his family was still alive in the underground chamber. He never knew they weren't killed by the tornado. He died believing they were in their shelter, safe, that he just needed to reach them. He died trying to get home. This detail had been lost in the chaos of the original investigation. When Robert's body was identified through dental records in May 2012, it was noted in case files, but somehow never properly connected to the larger investigation. The chaos of managing multiple deaths, dozens of injuries, and the overall disaster response led to communication failures between agencies. It was a tragic oversight, but ultimately it didn't change the central truth. 4 members of the Hartley family were murdered by Dennis Brennan, sealed in an underground tomb, and left to die slowly while he walked free. On March 5, 2024, at 6 a.m., FBI agents and Sarasota Police SWAT team surrounded a condominium in Sarasota, Florida. Dennis Brennan, now 70 years old, was arrested in his bedroom, still in his pajamas. He was charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder: Diana Hartley, Emma Hartley, Kyle Hartley, and Mason Hartley. During his initial interrogation, after being read his Miranda rights, Brennan said only 6 words before requesting an attorney: "I knew you'd find them eventually." Over the following weeks, through forensic evidence and recovered journals found in a storage unit Brennan had rented in Louisville, investigators reconstructed his entire plan. The journals were chilling. Hundreds of pages, handwritten, meticulous. They documented his obsession with Emma Hartley starting in 2010. They described his fantasies, his plans, his careful construction of the underground chamber. One entry from July 2011 read, "She will understand someday, when I can explain everything without the world interfering, when it's just us, and I can show her how much I care, how much I've prepared. She'll see that I'm the only one who truly sees her." Another entry from February 2012, just weeks before the tornado, read, "Waiting for the right moment. It has to be perfect. Chaos. Confusion. A moment when the impossible seems possible. Natural disasters, evacuation orders, war. Something where a disappearance might be explained by circumstances beyond anyone's control. He'd been planning it for years. The tornado simply provided the opportunity he'd been waiting for. During plea negotiations, which prosecutors rejected, Brennan's attorney claimed his client had intended to release the family after the tornado chaos subsided, but panicked and then couldn't face what he'd done. Forensic psychologist Dr. Amanda Rhodes, who evaluated Brennan, testified this claim was not credible. The chamber was designed to be soundproof and escape-proof, she said in her report. He lined the walls with foam insulation specifically to muffle screams. He installed bolts that could only be operated from outside. He built it 3 years before the crime. This was premeditated murder, not a panicked mistake. The trial is scheduled for September 2024. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty. On March 15, 2024, the Hartley family was reburied in Henryville Cemetery. This time, the caskets were not empty. More than 1,200 people attended, 10 times the population of Henryville. The entire town shut down. People drove from across the country, former residents of Henryville who'd moved away after the tornado, but still remembered the Hartleys. Strangers who'd followed the case for 12 years. Media from across the nation. 5 caskets, side by side. Robert James Hartley, 1969-2012. Diana Lynn Hartley, 1971-2012. Emma Grace Hartley, 1996-2012. Kyle Robert Hartley, 2000-2012. Mason Scott Hartley, 2004-2012. Together in life, separated by evil, reunited in peace. Sarah Mitchell stood at the graves, now 28 years old, reading Emma's final text message aloud for everyone to hear. In shelter, safe. Talk after storm. She thought she was safe, Sarah said through tears. She texted me that she was safe, and I believed for 12 years that the tornado took her, but she wasn't safe. She was betrayed by someone we all trusted, someone we thought was just a quiet, harmless neighbor. She paused, looking at the crowd, her voice breaking. The storm didn't kill Emma. A monster did. A monster who lived next door, who accepted our kindness, who we trusted, and he hid his crime inside a tragedy for 12 years. The lessons from the Hartley family case have reverberated through law enforcement and disaster response communities across the country. Lesson 1. Never assume the biggest mistake in the Hartley investigation was the assumption that their disappearance was tornado-related. Because the explanation seemed obvious. They were last seen entering a tornado shelter. The tornado destroyed their house. Bodies couldn't be found. Investigators accepted the natural disaster theory too readily. The case is now taught in FBI training academies as an example of how cognitive biases can derail investigations. Just because an explanation seems obvious doesn't mean it's correct. Lesson 2. Disasters create opportunities for predators. Dennis Brennan waited years for the perfect circumstances to commit his crime. The tornado provided chaos, confusion, and a built-in explanation for disappearance. Law enforcement agencies now train specifically on the chaos cover phenomenon, how criminals exploit natural disasters, mass casualties, and emergencies to mask crimes. After the Hartley case, Indiana implemented the Hartley Protocol, new procedures requiring thorough investigation of all missing persons reports during and after natural disasters, not assuming natural disaster causation without evidence. Lesson 3. Trust your instincts. Diana Hartley had mentioned to a neighbor in 2011 that Emma felt uncomfortable around Dennis Brennan. The comment was dismissed as teenage awkwardness. That discomfort was Emma's instinct recognizing something wrong, something predatory in Brennan's attention. If someone makes you uncomfortable, especially if they make your children uncomfortable, trust that instinct. It exists for a reason. Lesson 4. Never stop searching for truth. Sarah Mitchell refused to accept the official explanation for 12 years. She organized searches. She maintained social media pages. She kept the case alive in public consciousness. Without her persistence, the Hartley case might have remained closed forever, because investigators had moved on, because the community had accepted the natural disaster explanation, because it seemed impossible that the truth could be anything else. When construction workers accidentally discovered the underground chamber, It was Sarah's years of advocacy that ensured the investigation moved quickly and thoroughly. Authorities already knew someone cared deeply about finding answers. As I finish this investigation, I want to return to where we started. Sarah Mitchell standing in an empty lot on March 2, 2024, holding a photograph of her and Emma, placing flowers where her best friend's house once stood. Except now, everything is different. Now Sarah knows that Emma didn't die in seconds, swept away by a tornado. She knows Emma died over 3 days, trapped underground, scratching at walls until her fingers bled, her final hours spent in darkness and terror. That knowledge is unbearable, but it's also in a terrible way closure. For 12 years I pictured Emma being carried away by the wind, Sarah said in an interview after the reburial. I pictured it being quick, painless, like she just vanished. Finding out the truth was devastating, but it also meant she didn't vanish. She fought. She tried to survive. She never gave up hope. That was Emma. Sarah has started a foundation in Emma's name, the Emma Hartley Memorial Foundation, dedicated to improving missing persons investigations during natural disasters and providing support for families of disaster victims. The foundation has already helped implement the Hartley Protocol in 15 states. Emma wanted to save animals, Sarah said. She wanted to be a veterinarian. She wanted to help. So I'm going to help in her name. I'm going to make sure what happened to her family never happens to anyone else. The Hartley family case reminds us of uncomfortable truths. Natural disasters kill quickly and indiscriminately, but human evil is patient, calculating, and often hiding in plain sight. We expect danger from storms, from earthquakes, from forces of nature we can see coming. We don't expect it from the quiet neighbor who waves hello, who attends the same church, who seems sad and lonely and harmless. Dennis Brennan lived next to the Hartley family for 5 years. He accepted their kindness. He ate Diana's casseroles. He watched Robert help other neighbors. He saw the children growing up, and the entire time he was building a tomb underground, waiting for the perfect moment to use it. The perfect moment came on March 2, 2012, when an EF4 tornado provided the chaos he needed. 11 people died in that tornado in 20 minutes of natural fury. 4 more died over 4 days in an underground chamber, killed not by nature, but by the calculated cruelty of another human being. The tornado destroyed houses, snapped trees, tore apart a community, but it was Dennis Brennan who destroyed a family that had shown him nothing but kindness. As of this recording, Dennis Brennan is being held without bond at Indiana State Prison. His trial is scheduled for September 2024. Prosecutors are seeking the death penalty, 4 counts of first-degree murder, with aggravating factors including murder of children, torture, lying in wait, and exceptional depravity. Legal experts believe the case is open and shut. The forensic evidence is overwhelming. The journals provide clear documentation of premeditation. Brennan's own statement, "I knew you'd find them eventually," is essentially a confession. If convicted, Dennis Wayne Brennan will likely spend the rest of his life in prison, or he'll be executed by lethal injection. Indiana still maintains the death penalty for the most heinous murders. Either way, he will die knowing that his crime, which he thought was perfect, which he believed would be forever attributed to a natural disaster, was ultimately discovered, that the family he buried in darkness has been returned to the light, that their story is known. That justice, though delayed 12 years, has finally arrived. The Hartley family's story is one of the most heartbreaking cases I've ever covered on this channel. It's a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we can see coming. The tornadoes, the earthquakes, the obvious disasters. Sometimes they're the ones living next door, hiding behind normal facades, waiting patiently for the perfect moment to strike. But it's also a story about persistence, about Sarah Mitchell refusing to let her best friend be forgotten, about investigators who never truly closed the case, about the random chance of construction workers breaking ground at exactly the right spot, at exactly the right depth, to finally reveal the truth. Emma Hartley texted safe at 2:47 p.m. on March 2, 2012. She wasn't safe, but 12 years later, her story is finally told. Her family's remains are finally at rest, and the man who murdered them has finally been caught. If you've stayed with me through this entire investigation, thank you. Stories like this are difficult to tell and difficult to hear, but they're important. They remind us to pay attention, to trust our instincts, to never stop searching for truth, and to never take the people we love for granted. Please leave a comment telling me what you think. Subscribe to the channel if you want more deep dive investigations like this one. Hit that like button. It genuinely helps these stories reach more people. And if you knew the Hartley family, if you lived in Henryville in 2012, if this story touched you in any way, share it. Let people know. Let Emma's story be remembered, not just as a tragedy, but as a reminder to stay vigilant, to trust our instincts, and to never stop fighting for justice. The tornado of March 2nd, 2012, lasted 20 minutes. Dennis Brennan's crime lasted 12 years. But justice, delayed but determined, has finally arrived. Rest in peace, Robert, Diana, Emma, Kyle, and Mason Hartley. Your story is told. Your suffering is known. You are not forgotten.